Chapter 19: Immigration, Institutional Load, and the Fracturing of Administrative Coherence. Immigration in the 21st century is no longer merely a demographic instrument. It functions as an institutional stress test for modern administrative states. Health systems, schools, welfare administrations, regulatory bodies, courts, and housing authorities were designed for culturally homogeneous, linguistically unified, and educationally aligned populations. They were built on assumptions of shared norms, predictable behavior, and consistent civic expectations. When mass immigration introduces large, heterogeneous populations into these systems, the administrative load does not rise incrementally but exponentially. Late-stage immigration thus becomes one of the primary accelerants of capability-complexity mismatch. This dynamic is not ideological, it is structural. Institutions require stable and standardized information to function, consistent behavior, uniform expectations, predictable responses, and broadly shared assumptions about rules and responsibilities. Homogeneous societies naturally generate these conditions. Post-war Japan, late industrial Germany, mid-century Britain and Australia operated under simplified institutional expectations, shared language, shared educational baselines, similar family structures, and common civic norms. Their governance accumulated administrative capital, routines, informal expectations, and efficient workflows built on the presumption of behavioral uniformity. Schools could teach large cohorts with minimal differentiation. Courts could process cases predictably. Hospitals could operate with standardized procedures. Police could enforce norms without navigating multiple cultural frameworks. The machinery was optimized for a population that behaved within a narrow band of variation. Mass immigration alters the underlying assumptions without altering the machinery built upon them. The population changes, the bureaucracy does not. Institutions designed for one type of input must now manage another. The result is institutional overload, more paperwork, more exceptions, more translators, more disputes, more hearings, more welfare processing, more policing complexity, more specialized staff, and more administrative friction at every layer. The burden lands most heavily on mid-tier operators, teachers, nurses, caseworkers, police officers, judges, clerks, administrators, who must adjust continuously to greater linguistic, cultural, and behavioral variation. The capability threshold required to perform these roles rises, while the average capability of operators stagnates or declines. The arithmetic of institutional load is visible in education systems across Northern Europe. Sweden absorbed one of the highest per capita migration inflows in the developed world after 2015. Its school system, previously among the world's strongest, experienced sharp declines in international performance metrics, widening achievement gaps, and a dramatic reallocation of classroom time toward language remediation and behavioral management. Teachers increasingly shifted from instruction to triage. Standards did not collapse, but they softened to keep classrooms functional. The system adjusted to volume by lowering rigor, not because educators lost competence, but because the population inputs no longer matched the system's original design assumptions. Healthcare systems follow the same pattern. In Britain, the National Health Service now spends hundreds of millions annually on medical interpreters. Consultations take longer. Diagnostic chains slow. Administrative staffing expands. Clinicians increasingly manage translation logistics alongside clinical decisions. Emergency departments clog. Wait times lengthen. The system still operates, but with thicker layers and greater friction. Medicine becomes as much about communication management as treatment. Throughput falls not because doctors have become worse, but because institutional load has risen faster than operational capacity. Welfare bureaucracies exhibit similar strain. Germany's asylum system after 2015 illustrates this mechanically. The Federal Office for Migration and Refugees accumulated hundreds of thousands of unresolved cases. Processing times stretched from months to years. Caseworkers were rushed through abbreviated training. Error rates rose. Emergency staffing and procedural shortcuts became normal. The institution did not collapse. It thickened. Precision declined. Administrative drag increased. The system survived by lowering operational standards to maintain throughput. The justice system experiences the sharpest form of overload. Policing relies on shared behavioral norms, understood expectations about compliance, confrontation, and conflict resolution. When cultural heterogeneity rises rapidly, officers must navigate multiple behavioral codes simultaneously. Cognitive load increases. Mistakes rise. Oversight intensifies. Recruitment standards soften. In high immigration districts of France, courts increasingly rely on translators, hearings lengthen, case backlogs grow, and informal community dispute mechanisms expand alongside formal law. Parallel systems emerge. Authority fragments. The state still exists, but its informational monopoly weakens. Housing authorities and planning departments confront comparable strain. Permitting regimes designed for predictable household structures now manage higher turnover, informal occupancy, subletting, and density beyond original design limits. Administrative procedures multiply to manage disputes, inspections, and irregular compliance. Planners retrofit complexity into infrastructure built for simplicity. Every adjustment consumes bandwidth. The system grows heavier as capability thins. Late-stage immigration also generates the phenomenon of parallel systems. When formal institutions overload, communities construct informal substitutes, community clinics, dispute mediators, translation brokers, mutual aid networks. These structures serve immediate needs but dilute the state's informational control. Bureaucracy becomes navigated through intermediaries with uneven accuracy. Some populations bypass formal institutions entirely. The administrative state must now manage not only individuals, but competing cultural frameworks operating in parallel. This divergence became highly visible during Europe's mid-2010s migration wave. Asylum and welfare systems designed for orderly processing encountered populations with fundamentally different expectations about documentation, authority, and state obligation. Institutions did not fail because staff were incompetent. They failed because their behavioral assumptions no longer held. Education becomes the front line of fragmentation. Teachers must maintain instruction while simultaneously managing integration, translation, behavioral triage, and social service coordination. Job complexity explodes. At the same time, recruitment standards fall as working conditions deteriorate. Schools shift from engines of capability formation into overloaded holding systems. Long-term capability erosion accelerates. Political fragmentation follows. Homogeneous societies can sustain broad coalitions and long-term planning. As heterogeneity rises, politics segments. Parties target narrower demographics. Immigration becomes a polarizing axis. Consensus evaporates. Governments lose the ability to reform institutions or simplify bureaucracy. Fragmentation produces gridlock. Gridlock blocks simplification. Simplification is the only viable response to a capability-complexity mismatch. This produces an institutional doom loop. Immigration raises administrative load. Rising load degrades performance. Poor performance fuels public dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction intensifies political fragmentation. Fragmentation prevents systemic reform. Institutions weaken further, even as demographic decline increases reliance on immigration. The system decays through chronic dysfunction, slow permits, delayed construction, overwhelmed courts, underperforming schools, congested hospitals, declining craftsmanship, widening governance gaps. The structural truth is simple. Immigration does not inherently weaken institutions. Early-stage immigration into high-capability environments strengthens them. Late-stage immigration into low-capability, high-complexity environments weakens them. Integration requires state capacity. When that capacity is already strained, immigration amplifies the mismatch between institutional assumptions and operational reality. The next chapter examines institutional sclerosis itself, how advanced states respond to overload by expanding bureaucracy, thickening regulation, and adding procedural layers that make systems more fragile rather than more resilient.